All right. Welcome, everybody. Okay. So, my name is Laura Johnson. I'm a certified life coach, and I help Christian moms, particularly, do what they feel called to do. If there's something that you feel called to do. That's my job is to help you actually do it. And I truly do believe we all have a purpose here on this earth. And so, one of the things I love about doing this book club is because there are so many amazing books out there, so much amazing content, and sometimes we just don't have time to get to the books. So, one of the things I love doing, I love to read. I'm kind of a book junkie. So, I figure there's probably other women, other Christian women like me that want to join on the book club. And so, that's kind of how the book club came to be. And so, you never have to read the book to join. It's just something fun where we talk about the book and how you can apply it. And then, if you choose to, you can always go back and read the book. So one of the things I always like to start with, well, first we're doing the four agreements. It looks like this. And I always like to start with like how you know if you're in the right book club. So I'm going to read a couple things to you that we're going to be addressing today. All right. So you know you're in the right place right now is if you feel like you're starting to gain momentum for your goals, but then some big event, like your son going into the hospital, that's where I've been this month, some big event, life happens and it completely throws you off of course. And then you have this horrible fear of failure or having other people see you fail. You spend tons of time trying to make the quote unquote right decision or the thing that you're supposed to be doing that God wants you to do. But then you end up so stuck that you end up like not moving forward at all in any decision, in any goal that you have. If you worry a lot about what other people think, to the point where you don't like posting, you don't like telling people your goals, almost like you kind of keep them closed off in your heart a little bit. If you find yourself having imaginary conversations with people, either in the shower, when you're driving your car, anytime you're by yourself and you're thinking about all the things you wish you would have said. Another one is if you feel like you're having to push so hard to reach your goals that you end up sacrificing time with your family, you end up sacrificing your self care, and you end up sacrificing the relationships that matter the most to you, sacrificing family time in order to reach your goals. But then you think it's not even worth it. So you just give up on the goals entirely in the name of self care and being there for your family. So I want you can go over to the chat box. Tell me if any of those stood out to you, because these are things that I see and I coach on constantly. And what I see happens with every one of my clients is that when they're trying to reach their goals, they do get thrown off course for years from their goals, or they end up over analyzing every decision that they make, that they don't make any decisions and they don't trust themselves in the decisions they end up making. So they just get stuck. The other thing they start doing is they start trying to please everyone and doing things to make everybody else happy, and that they just end up throwing their goals out the window, like I mentioned before. And so this is the vicious cycle that I see so many people stuck in every single day. And that's when they start doing that, they think they need to research more, they need to ask people more, they need to have a better time management, they need to have a new planner, they need to have a better way of focusing or for tracking all of their goals, they need to hire help to help them in their house because they're desperate. All of these things are not sustainable long term. And you'll see and experience that in your life to that point where you'll just burn out and you'll hit a wall every time. And it's frustrating and exhausting to always be in the cycle. So anytime I'm looking at books and we're picking books, this is why. These are the books like this one right here, the four agreements, that will help you move beyond this cycle that you're in right now. And so usually like as a coach, there's always three things. And I always talk about this in the book clubs, three things that I focus on to solve this long-term for you so that you can answer whatever you feel called to do. And that's to always to discover who you are and what you're meant to do. That plan that God has for you. What is that calling? And then the second step is learning how to achieve it without burning out or sacrificing time with your family. And then the third one is while you're doing that, you're embracing the new person you're becoming without sabotaging yourself or your goals. And you're keeping those relationships that matter the most always at the forefront of your mind. And so that's what I loved about the four agreements. is he so perfectly outlines those three things all the time throughout the entire book. And again, like I mentioned before, it's a very short book. It's a really interesting read. And it's one that I like. My husband is not this way. My husband is an accountant. He's very analytical. He's very down to earth. I like to spend more time in like the philosophical type, exponential thinking. And that's kind of the feel that I had at the beginning of the book, where he talks about we're living in a dream. Okay. So he talks about there's the asleep dream, which is self-explanatory. And then there's the living dream. This is when we are awake. And he talks about how every single one of us is just living this dream. Now, in this dream, there is a process he calls the domestication of humans. Now, when we're born, we don't have a sense of a belief system yet. Every single one of us is born into a set of generational beliefs, a set of cultural beliefs, a set of community beliefs. And when we're young and we're being raised, there is a domestication process that starts to happen, as he talks about in the book. And when we're going through this, what's happening as part of this living dream is that these belief systems we're being invited to these different belief systems. Now, two things happen at this point is that we have the opportunity to agree, we make an agreement to take on that belief system, or we rebel against that belief system. So as a child, what we're going through this domestication process is that we are accepting and agreeing the belief systems that are all around us. Now, once we start agreeing, or when we're deciding whether we're going to agree with these belief systems, he talks about how we're being rewarded or punished based on this agreement. And I'll explain more about, that in just a second. But as we're going through this reward and this punishment, we have what's the word I'm looking for? An incentive to agree. Okay. We want to agree with this belief system because of the reward that's attached. So a really good example of this on a very basic level was that when I was potty training my kids, I wanted to get their agreement to sit on the toilet. Please. Like every mom has experienced, please sit your booty on that toilet. I want that agreement. And there was a benefit to that. They would get a sticker on a chart. They would get a tattoo, like a little sticker tattoo on their skin, something with that, to where I was inviting them into that system that I had created, and I wanted their agreement. Now, that's a very rudimentary example, but this happens over and over for us in our life on many different levels. And when we're looking at that, he talks about in the book how, as part of this domestication of humans, our belief system creates a book of law within our mind. And this book of law is individualized to every single person based on your mind and the agreements that you've chosen to make. Now, as part of this, with this book of law, he talks about, so I'm going to erase this side because we want to use this side over here. He talks about two, how would I word them? Two individuals, we'll call them, where he talks about the inner judge and the victim that lives there, in addition to our book of law or our belief system. Now, recognizing our inner judge is the one that, like the way he talks about this in the book, I actually really like what he said. Let me see if I don't think I have that quote specifically, but he talks about how the inner judge is the one that's like, hey, you have this book of law that says you should behave in a certain way. You've made these agreements, okay? And you're really failing. You're screwing it all up. and you start paying for your mistakes over and over and over. He calls it the great injustice, where we make a mistake once and the inner judge holds that over our head forever. So the injustice becomes when we start paying for those mistakes over and over again. So then he talks about the inner victim that we have. And the inner victim, every single person has one of these. And the inner victim spends time blaming ourselves, like, oh, we're fundamentally flawed. There's something wrong with us. I'll never figure it out. Everybody else has it figured out. What is so wrong with me? So that's what the victim sounds like. And then it's the belief system, the book of law, that is we're holding ourselves to this standard at all times. So when we're looking at that, he says in the book, 95% of our book of law is false. And that this book of law creates a lot of unnecessary suffering for us. But we have such a fear of going against this book of law because these are the agreements that we have made. So another example of how this starts to play out. So I shared the example of the toddler. I'm trying to think of one in like current day. So a current day one, like book of law, like I am irresponsible. Like this is a thought that I've had to work through in my life. I am irresponsible if I show up late to something. Like that to me causes so much embarrassment. And I've made that agreement based on experiences that I had that I hated when I was younger and I would forget to go somewhere. Like I remember I had an appointment to be at and it was not on my radar at all. Like I was literally out mowing a lawn when I realized I was supposed to be somewhere 45 minutes ago, professional dress. I was mortified. So at that time, I had this belief system that it was totally irresponsible. So even if I'm 2 minutes late somewhere, the inner judge starts telling me, like, remember that one time, however, like 20 years ago, that you were completely out where you were supposed to, like, you're going to pay for that mistake again, even though it was 2 minutes late, you're going to pay for that mistake again. And then the victim is like, I can't do anything right. It's horrible. I'm screwing everything up. My kids are going to be screwed up. Like, and it just starts layering on based on the belief system that anytime I'm late, it is totally irresponsible. There could be an accident, and something totally out of my control. My son poops his pants and you have to take time for that. Like all of those things, but that's part of the belief system I have. So every single one of us has all of this set up. And this is what he talks about in the beginning of the book, that in order to ever have freedom in your life, you have to start questioning the belief system that you have. So going back, like when I'm working with my clients, and that's like the fundamental thing that like every single one of us starts to work on, is we have to question that belief system. Some of this, a lot of it is about our role as women, our role as mothers, as wives. It is questioning the beliefs we have about money, about society, about, being able to achieve our goals and be a good mom. All of that comes back to our belief system that we have. So in order for us to really be able to move beyond that and to enjoy the freedom that comes, it's really questioning when the inner judge and when the victim starts to show up and why they're showing up in the first place. So he has, let me read. I've got a couple quotes. I felt like this whole book was like, I call them like zingers. So if you do choose to read the book, I underline so much because there's just a lot of like really good one-liners that I feel like you could just make a whole bunch of like inspirational quotes from it. So what he talks about is like, in order for us to really move beyond the inner judge and the victim, is we have to start accepting ourselves for who we are, not based on like the book of law of all the things we think we should be, but who we actually are. Like from a spiritual sense, I think about it as like, this is our spirit, our inner spirit. So he talks about that the big problem is that we don't accept ourselves. He says humans punish themselves endlessly for not being what they believe they should be. They become very self-abusive and they use other people to abuse themselves as well. So when we're going about and we think about people, and we're going to talk about this more in just a second, We talk about people inviting us, trying to get us to believe their belief system as well. We'll start using that to punish ourselves. That inner judge starts to step in on like, see, you really are irresponsible. They think you're irresponsible too. And that's where we start endlessly punishing ourselves, and we get into this very self-abusive relationship. So in order for us to take our power back, well, and he talks about this in the book, that in order to break free, like our energy is consumed by keeping this book of law intact, keeping all these agreements intact, and our energy and our mind we spend so much time trying to behave in this very specific way we think we should be. But here's the interesting thing is that the moment we start breaking some of these agreements, that's the moment where we start enjoying more power to be who we are and who God has always meant for us to be. So he gives us 4 agreements on how we actually do that. And what he's doing with these is he's inviting us to break some of our past agreements and to invite and to make to accept 4 new agreements into our mind. And before, I'm going to write these out really quick so you have a chance to write them down. But if you have any questions, go over to the chat box and write that down. Okay, so the first one is be impeccable. Oh, sorry, my phone. Be impeccable with your word. The second one is to don't take things personally. The third one, and I want to make sure, because Rebecca, Becky, I think you go by Becky. Becky said she's got to get off. So I want to make sure I write all these down so you've got them. Don't make assumptions. And then the fourth one is to always do your best. And we're going to talk about these. But I wanted to get them all out. So Becky, that way you've got them as well. And I don't know if you've mentioned that you had read the book, but I know you mentioned you do have a meeting. So, okay. So here are the 4 things. So I'm going to start with what he talks about with impeccability. He talks about like why your word. He says your word is the power you have to create. Your word is the gift that comes directly from God. Through the word, you express your creative power. It is through the word that you manifest everything. And I think that is such a beautiful thing, that like you literally have a gift from God every single time you use your word. And so he talks about like, what is impeccability? And I love what he mentioned on this. Let's see if I can find it really quick. Impeccability means without sin. So impeccable comes from a Latin word, which means sin. And then like the im part, means without. So without sin. So everything you believe or say, or everything you feel or believe or say that goes against yourself is a sin. He says being impeccable is not going against yourself. That's hard to do. I'll be the first one to tell you, like getting so clear on who you are and always holding true to that, because who you are, like on a very deep fundamental level, that is the spirit that lives within you. That is the child of God that exists there. And everything else, the way your mind, the desires you have to please other people, not from like a place of like from service, but a place of like, I want them to like me. That all comes against who we are. And that's when we're not in alignment with God the most. And so what he talks about is when we're trying to be impeccable with our word, we have the opportunity to go against who we are. And when we're doing that, it's like emotional poison to our body. That when we're sharing that with other people, when we're just trying to please and be what we think other people want us to be based on the agreements that we've made, that's when we go against ourselves. And every single time we go against ourselves, we start rejecting ourselves on a very fundamental level, because we can feel the difference. And so I'm going to read that next part where he talks about that. I told you he has so many good of these like zingers. He says, you can measure your impeccability of your word by your level of self-love. How much you love yourself and how you feel about yourself are directly proportionate to the quality and integrity of your word. When you are impeccable with your word, you feel good, you feel happy and at peace. So I love that right there. And the way I describe like our self-love and our ability to love other people, it comes down from the very fundamental beliefs we have for ourselves. Okay. And so when we are truly accepting who we are, and we talked about this back in our Daring Greatly training as well, or about the book, most of us have a shield that we have built around ourselves. So anytime love wants to come in, it's blocked because we are afraid that other people will reject us, when in reality, we're already rejecting ourselves. We're keeping ourselves small and hidden because we are scared. But that also blocks the love. The second we start feeling love for ourselves, we open ourselves up, we become more vulnerable. And that's when that's when the wall and the shield starts to come down. And that's when we can start feeling love from other people. But just as he mentioned, being impeccable with your word, you're being impeccable with your word based on the level of self-love that you have. This is not easy to do. And if you haven't watched the book club about Daring Greatly, we spend a lot of time in learning how to be vulnerable and taking that shield down, because this is fundamental to anything you ever do in life. And in order to really be who you're meant to be and to do the things that God is calling you to do, you have to first see your gifts and practice that self-love. So that's the first one. That's, being impeccable with your word. And the more you start moving forward in that, you're going to start recognizing, let me go back. You're going to start breaking some of the agreements that you have to behave or believe in a certain way. Now, that's not to say like you leave all of the belief systems that you've been raised in, but you may start to question some of them and choose if they are beneficial agreements that you want to keep or not, or a beneficial belief system. For me, I knew like I loved the way I was raised. It was I have incredible parents. I've had plenty of challenges, but like I had a really amazing family. But one of the belief systems that I had from my family, one of the generational ones that I was born into, was that suffering was noble or valiant. And so when I wasn't suffering, I thought I couldn't become closer to Christ, and that my life was too easy and that I wouldn't become perfect. It was a very strange way that my brain had interpreted it. So I had to really practice that self-love, that I could still become close to Christ even when I'm not in the depths of hell in my life. And I didn't have to create additional suffering for myself in order to be more noble, in order to become closer to Christ. So that was not anything from my family that, they told me this certain thing. It was a belief system and agreement my brain had created on its own, and that I got to start to question. So I love this, like being impeccable with your word means that you are without sin, that you are keeping yourself true to who you are and who you've always meant to be. So the second one he talks about is not taking things personally. He talks about how we have this sense of, he calls it personal importance, meaning that everything is about me. He talks about how this is, when we take things personally, it is an actual, like, it's a very selfish way to live, where we make everything about who we are and our mistakes, and we can turn everything. And I don't know if you've ever been with somebody that's like this, where you can be telling them a story about something that you're experiencing, and somehow they spin it around and they start talking about themselves. And you're like, that was like some ninja mind moves. I don't know how you did that, but it happens. And we all know, and I think we can all like figure out somebody in our life that does that. And you don't feel like they're really listening. So that comes from taking things very personally. And so he talks about how every single person has their own agreements, their own traps that they have within their own mind. And what they're doing is, and I loved the phrase that he used. He says, they are inviting you to eat, like when they're saying some comment to you, they're inviting you to eat their emotional garbage, and you're picking it up and allowing it to become your garbage. And I loved that thought because it's so true. How often will somebody say some comment to us that we don't agree with at all? But suddenly when we start questioning ourselves and our ability and our capabilities, when in reality, it was never about us, it was about their own insecurities. And that's why they were saying whatever it was they were saying. So he talks about how humans have an addiction to suffering. And, it goes back to what I was just telling you about with my belief system that suffering was noble in some way. And I think every single one of us get in that position where we want to suffer in some way. And so we will continually find evidence on how we should pick up other people's emotional garbage to keep ourselves, to beat ourselves down, and to believe that we are messed up and flawed in some way. This is very human nature. And this goes completely against the plan that God has for every single one of us. He does not want us to suffer. He wants us to feel his peace and his joy, but we have to stop taking things personally and picking up everybody's emotional garbage. So he talks about this. Let me see if I can find the quote really quick. So he talks about, let's see, where did it? He says, sorry, I thought I had this one marked. He says, if you live without fear, if you love, there is no place for any of those emotions, talking about like all of the negative garbage emotions that we want to pick up. He says, when everything around you is great, everything makes you happy. You are loving everything that is around you because you are loving yourself, because you like the way that you are. So when we're starting to when we don't take things personally, we're validating, we're learning how to validate and have that self-love for ourselves. And that's where we can really spend our time, is being able to see that it's okay to be happy. It's okay to like ourselves. And we don't have to take things so personal, that we can just be who we are. And this is hard to do because we have really been raised, again, in a belief system that rewards outside validation. We want the A+, we want the gold star, and we will do whatever it takes, and we'll change exactly who we are in order to get that outside validation. This is especially critical when we're teaching our kids, is that we often reward the grades as well. We're reinforcing that at home, but helping them see that who they are, and helping them like come out of their shell a little bit, and being able to reward when they are putting themselves out there. That's a very vulnerable place for our kids to be. And we can open up that space for that to happen for them as well. So he said, even the opinions you have about yourself are not necessarily true. Therefore, you don't need to take whatever you hear in your own mind personally as well. And then he talks about how there is another voice that we hear. He talks about this as these are the allies that speak to us, the Toltecs. These are the people that he is. I should have introduced that, but the belief system of the Toltecs, the people in Mexico, that have all of this knowledge. This is what they believe, that there are allies that exist. And sometimes we will feel that, where it literally feels like there is another mind or a voice speaking to our mind. These are the allies. They're helping us to see who we truly are on a very deep level. He talks about how this is existing on the level of the gods. He said the mind lives in more than one dimension. And there may be times when you have ideas that don't originate in your mind, but you're perceiving them with your mind. So I think that's such an important part for every single one of us to remember, is that as we're going through this, as we're learning how to not take things personally, as we're learning how to validate ourselves, we can also get to that space where we are inviting God and his allies to also speak to us. And I'm a firm believer that there's people, past and present in our lives, that are also working for our good, even though our mortal eyes cannot comprehend them. And I think that's a very very wonderful place to exist. So as you quiet your mind and as you spend time, meditating, praying, really be listening to those voices as well, because that will help invite you to new agreements, new belief systems that you can have for your life. And you can usually feel when that happens. And it's almost like something unlocks in your body. Like I always think about it as like a key, like something just like clicks. And suddenly you're not spinning in drama. Something just feels very grounded and loving within your body. That's you being invited to a new agreement, a new belief system. And you can buy into that agreement and take that on as part of your new belief system. So the third thing he talks about is not making assumptions. And I don't know if you ever heard the phrase. my brother used to always tell me, like, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. And I was like, okay, whatever. And we never swore in our house growing up either. So to hear my brother say that, it was like, yeah, okay. So yeah, you've heard that before. So it kind of made me laugh when this was one of the agreements that he said, because I can hear my brother's voice so distinctly. But what I love about this was he kind of took it to another level, where he talks about how everybody has their own belief systems that exist within their own mind. And all of these belief systems kind of come together and they start clashing a little bit. So it's not that we intentionally make an assumption, it's that our brain wants the answers to everything. So if there is vagueness, it will create an answer for us, even if it's not a good answer. And this is the way that we often communicate with each other. And we don't mean to do it, but oftentimes this is where gossip starts to generate from, is we don't have all the answers. We create a story to fill in the blanks, and then we pass that story on to other people. And he talks about how that is like the emotional poison that's seeping through, that we have the ability to literally cast spells on other people based on the words that come out of our mouths. And the reverse is also true, that we can cast good spells on people based on the words that come out of our mouth. But all of that first comes from being able to recognize what is reality and where do we not have all of the answers, and being okay when we don't have the answers. So he talks about, let's see. So oftentimes when we're making assumptions, so if others tell us something, we make assumptions. And if they don't tell us something, we make assumptions to fill in our need to know and need to replace. Let me start over. If others tell us something, we make assumptions. And if they don't tell us something, we make assumptions to fulfill our need to know and to replace the need to communicate. We make all sorts of assumptions because we don't have the courage to ask questions. Now, when he said that, it was like, oh, there's a dagger, like, oh, every single time this happens, it comes from my own courage of not being able to ask questions. So I'm going to share an example of this because this like rang so true to me. It was really fascinating. A couple of years ago, I had a really close friend. We didn't see each other in person very often, but we were always communicating via text. And it was like we had built this friendship over text messaging for many years, just because we were busy moms and we couldn't be present. And as things got busier in our lives, like I just wasn't as responsive as I had been in the past. And, if you know me personally, like I never have my phone on me. I never respond to things. I'm horrible at following people back on social media. I'm rarely on social media. It's just not my jam. And it was so interesting because at one point, we kind of had this falling out. Now, on my side, I was so excited about my coaching business that I just wanted to tell everybody about it. This was years ago. And my friend was an incredible artist, and I was always looking at all of her art. Now, we just happened to both travel to Disneyland at the same time. And it was so fun in my mind to see her in the flesh. And we had my reality was like, I had such an amazing time. And we spent so much, just a few minutes talking. And then we were texting like, hey, what ride are you on? And then we kind of pass each other and our families. So within a couple weeks of getting home, she had sent me a text that said, when I saw you in Disneyland, it was so awkward. And you haven't followed my business for my art. So you must not like my art. You're judging me for what I'm doing. And like, it was this whole, like, you just keep talking about your coaching business and clearly you're not interested in me. It was like mind blowing on like how completely different our realities were. It was so stark different. And for this friend, she was going through a lot of challenges. I was not aware of those challenges. And it was just so, to me, that was that moment of like, our minds truly do create our reality. And I was making assumptions that she was okay in her life and that she wanted to hear about my coaching business and that she knew how much I loved her art and was always looking at it, even though I never communicated it. And she had made all these assumptions that I clearly didn't like her art and that I was being annoyed, like, like all, and then the awkwardness of Disneyland. It was so unbelievably different. And it was one of those lessons that I was completely grateful for. We were able to really express love for one another in our complete difference of reality based on the assumptions that we made. And so what I love is, let's see if I have this right here. He says, oftentimes we make assumptions. So we make the assumption that everyone sees life the way that we do. That's exactly what I thought. Like, clearly, I thought my friend believed everything that I did about how amazing and wonderful she was, but she didn't, because I wasn't communicating that. So she had made her own assumptions. She said, this is why we have a fear of being ourselves around others, because we think everyone else will judge us, victimize us, abuse us, and blame us as we do ourselves. So even before others have a chance to reject us, we've already rejected ourselves. That is a very powerful statement. And then he goes on to say, real love is accepting other people the way they are without trying to change them. If we try to change them, this means we don't really like them. That's another, again, I told you this whole book is like full of zingers. So I want you to really think about this for yourself, that if you have a fear of being criticized by other people, you are making an assumption about what they believe about you. And that is all comes from the way you are already rejecting yourself ahead of time. And so for my friend, she was really struggling in her life. So naturally, she assumed that I was rejecting her because she was already rejecting herself. And nothing I could have said or acted or done would have changed that. Now, we were able to get to a place of love and compassion and understanding, but that came with time. And all of that came from her own belief systems about who she was. And so really look at this, like each time we make an assumption, recognize where assumption of what other people are thinking about you, where am I already rejecting myself? And then see, where am I trying to change other people? And how can I get to a place of unconditional love, love like the Savior has? And that's where we can really start taking this and honoring this agreement as part of our life. So the last one that he talks about, I don't have to erase anything. So last one he talks about is always doing our best. And what I love that he says in here, he says, our best is never the same from one day to the next, because our best will always be altered based on the mood that we're feeling. That to me was like, whew, huge permission. I'm like, okay, that's really hard. So I want you to really think about that for yourself. Are you always holding your best, like doing your best, to when you are not on your period, when you've had really healthy food, when you've been exercising, when you've had 8 hours of sleep? Is that the best that you're holding yourself to, the standard that you've created? And is anything else like you're shaming yourself for? Because I know that I do that all the time. And I see my clients do the exact same thing. So anytime they start judging or shaming themselves, going back to that inner judge and that inner victim, that it's because they're holding themselves to a best that fluctuates, and they haven't given themselves permission to fluctuate with that. And so he also talks about never doing more or never doing less. And now I think all of us have this fear of like doing less than our best. We always do. So then we swing to the far end, the other end, and we overdo it. So he says, let's see. He says, when you overdo, you deplete your body and you go against yourself. And it will take you longer to accomplish your goal. But if you do less than your best, you subject yourself to frustration, self-judgment, guilt, and regrets. So it's so interesting to be able to really like recognize where you're swinging in all of that. And really, you are the only one that will know what your best is on any given day in any different hour. Like it can really fluctuate that much. And being able to give yourself that permission to allow for that fluctuation. The other thing he talks about, like doing your best, you will know when you're doing your best because you are doing it to be fully alive. You're not doing your best to get a specific reward. And again, this goes back to that belief system of like reward and punishment, that you have to behave a certain way in order to get that reward. But when you're doing your best, that is the reward. That's when you become fully alive. And so he talks about this. Let me see if I can find that. He says, doing your best, you're going to live your life intensely. You're going to be productive. You're going to be good to yourself because you will be giving yourself to your family, to your community, to everything. But it is the action that is going to make you feel intensely happy. When you always do your best, you take action. Doing your best is taking action because you love it, not because you're expecting a reward. He said, when people are expecting a reward, they start to resist work. So this is one of those factors that you can decide for yourself is what is the reward that I'm seeking if I'm resisting work? And what is it that I'm enjoying doing? How am I doing my best when I'm just really happy and being fully alive? Now, when I'm working with my clients, we spend so much time in the thought work. And it's so interesting because it's almost like they start, and I do the same thing. We start using coaching against ourselves where we think we have to be in our mind all the time. But then when we like let our mind go a little bit and we just start taking action and letting it be easy and having a really good time, not like getting graspy about reaching the goal, suddenly their goals come so much easier. I tell them it's kind of like when we're in the ocean and we're kicking our legs as hard as we can. Eventually, we will get to where we're going, but we're burned out. But if you stick fins on your feet, suddenly you're able to kick less and you're able to propel yourself forward. That's what it's like when you're doing your best in reaching your goals. It's like you're giving yourself permission to put fins on to propel yourself forward. And it's such a fun place to be in reaching your goals. And that is giving yourself that permission to fluctuate on doing your best based on whatever day it is. And whatever mood you're in, because we all know we experience a lot of moods. I know that I do. So these are the 4 agreements. And he says, in order to reach these 3, you've got to always be doing your best and give yourself grace and forgiveness when you recognize that you haven't been doing your best, and you can readjust and keep going. So these are the agreements that he has invited us to in order to accept and these as part of our belief system. But the last thing that I wanted to leave with you that he talks about is becoming a warrior. He says, in order to go against our current belief systems, in order to step away from our inner judge and the victim that exists, we have to become a warrior. He says a warrior is somebody that rebels against the agreements that aren't serving them. And that takes a lot of courage, and it's really uncomfortable. And your brain will freak out. Like, really, honestly, it feels like you're shedding your skin, like your old skin is coming off and you feel bare and naked, and it's scary and vulnerable. But that is the only way. And that's where like the courage to be that warrior starts to come in, that you can really rebel, and that this is creating a life, a beautiful life, one that's aligned with who you've always meant to be, the person that God wants you to be. And that's when you can start letting go and be free of he calls it the tyranny of your past belief system, and being able to experience that personal freedom, that loving, wild part of you that has always wanted to come out. And that comes, from accepting these 4 agreements and letting some of the other agreements go that haven't been serving you. So that is, in a nutshell, the 4 agreements, which I really love. And it's been an eye-opening experience for me, and being able to see, and that's where I would challenge you as well, be able to see where you want to focus and where you feel that you could practice or start with one of these agreements to begin with, and then start accepting some of the others. And yes, thank you. Thank you for staying on. Like I said, we'll have more people join in next month. This month was a very small month based on the circumstances in my life that we were figuring out. But I do love this. And this is really what I take all of my clients through this process and make it work for them based on their mind and everything that's happening with them. So if that's something that you're ever interested in, even on the replay, if you're listening to this, reach out to me. I will send this replay in the email, so everybody will have that, as well as my contact information. I do offer free consultations where we can go through this process for your own mind and really get clear on who it is that you feel you're meant to be and what God is calling you to do, and then how we can get you there. So I always do a drawing, and I'm terrible with names. I blame it on my dyslexia. So if you phonetically spell it, Unsi, is it Unsi? OC. OC, Onsi, Onsi. Okay, there we go. See, I told you I'm really bad. And I don't have my glasses on when I do these either. Okay, Ansi. So since you did stay on, you get the free book for the month. So way to go. So the next book that we are doing is called Big Magic, and it's all about creativity and learning how to be our most creative selves in whatever we feel called to do. I've already started reading it. You are going to love it. So you get to pick if you want a hard copy or if you want you need help with that. Okay, perfect. So you're going to really love it. So I can give you the Audible version or a hard copy. So I will email you as soon as we are off of this, and then you can give me your address if you want hard copy, or I will email you a link so that you can get the Audible version of it. So thank you very much for joining the book club. I am going to start the recording, but Ansi, if you have any questions, you're welcome to stay on, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the book. I will talk with you later.